Freedom is necessary to any creature on the planet. Animals that are intimately related to the wild nature especially need it. In this episode, you'll see cases of animal liberation that have shocked the whole world. Before we get on to the main part of our episode, I'd like to have a look at two touching photos and set ourselves up for the right vibe. In the first photo, we can see the most beautiful cat with an amazed look. The poor animal sits in the car, she looks in front of herself, and until the last moment she cannot believe that she'll become free for the first time in her life within minutes, and that she'll be able to start a new chapter. Despite the fact that this cat was an adult, I'm sure that this pleased her to no end. Just like in the case of this small predator, the lion cub rushed off to the future at the first opportunity. The animal was back in its element, even despite the fact that it had never lived there. By the way, leave a like if you also noticed the small lion's mother in the background that was more reserved and was in no hurry to leave the enclosure. Maybe she just wanted to admire her happy cub. Speaking of happy cubs, in the next story, very young seals were also liberated. These animals were in a deplorable state, and they would not have survived unaided. Fortunately, kind people noticed that in time and took all the seals to their research center. They were rendered necessary help, their injuries were healed, and of course they did not separate them from their brethren. After a long recovery, finally, the animals had the opportunity to come back to their native lands. In the end, they were placed in portable cages and brought to the Californian coast. Though I'm not acquainted with seals, this video seemed to me one of the most touching and nicest out of all I'd ever seen. In their movements, you could trace immense gratitude to people that had helped them. Because of those antennas on their heads, the seals looked like toys on the control station. Jokes aside, as I've understood, people needed antennas to track how fast the seals would get to the destination. I hope that in the process of adaptation to new life conditions, antennas will fall off. Otherwise, the seals will be too strange against the background of the rest. Speaking of weirdness, tell me, please, what do you think? Should we release a lion into the wild that grew in captivity? Many experts are sure that it's expressly prohibited. However, we and the South African Animal Welfare Association think differently. This video shows us that if we do everything right and think over the process of their comeback to the wild, this will be fulfilled more than smoothly. Despite the fact that lions grew up in captivity, they still remain wild and strong cats, kings of beasts that have no place in an enclosure. However blunt their instincts may be, 2 or 3 weeks of active hunting and extreme conditions will recover them, and they'll be back at the height of the food chain. Judging by how actively the predators left the trailer with enclosures, they could hardly wait for this moment. This meant that they would change their life with pleasure. They'd create pride, they'd set suitable rules, and they'd be hunting together. They'd soon have cubs that would be considered wild, as they'd be born in a wild and full-fledged pride. The seniors would teach them all the hunting subtleties, and a couple of years later, these small creatures would turn into the same as dangerous as their older brethren. Adult males can weigh up to 550 pounds. The length of their body, together with their heads, would be more than 8 feet. Naturally, males would be happy owners of things that other big cats don't have at their disposal. Their incredible mane, of course. This essential attribute can look differently. Everything depends on the place inhabited by the lion and the way of life they stick to. Scientists have registered that in captivity, lions usually stand for a lusher mane because nobody and their quadruped brethren take it out. This way, incidentally, the same lions that were released into the wild, in theory, can easily become leaders in someone else's pride. By any measures, the mane is one of the main indicators in lions, defining the dominant position of a male and a whole pride. Now I suggest that you should look at how the Andean condor was released into the wild. This bird belongs to the vulture family. It's not difficult to guess by the name that it's spread in the Andes. It's considered that this is the biggest flying bird of the whole Western Hemisphere. Its wingspan can reach up to 9.8 feet, with a weight of up to 33 pounds. Just look at these photos, at how majestically and confidently the bird torn away from the ground and flew towards a new life. It's not surprising that locals consider this bird the master of mountains. Such legends are composed about it. You cannot even imagine. We have to make a whole new episode about this. That's why I suggest that we restrict to the description of this bird and a review of its unique features. So, the Andean condor isn't used to diving lower than 1.9 miles above sea level. As a rule, it leads a settled way of life. It doesn't leave its native lands. However, in search of food, it can get over long distances. It's important not to confuse, despite big dimensions, this feathered creature hunts majorly carrion. Yes, this niche is not so honorable. However, other local animals still respect the Andean condor. By any measures, big dimensions, a giant powerful beak, and sharp claws are still at hand. They say that this bird can steal food from the adult cougars. This is how majestic it is. Come on, we've surprised ourselves enough. It's high time to relieve our emotions with something touching. In these photos, you can see how kind people release into the wild the nicest sea otter. As soon as the creature left its carrier, it found its place in the water. This is not the case of shy seal cubs that we saw at the beginning of the episode. So this sea otter made its way to the water, it lay on its back, and it raised its paws. Leave a like if you involuntarily came up with a smile on your face. I hope that this creature has all its life ahead and that it will live long and happily. Let's talk about decisiveness again. Many of you may think that if they found themselves in the shoes of these animals, they'd run away and jerk vacantly. In our head, this looks rather clear and understandable, but animals that spent years in captivity think of the world differently. Let tiny seals alone. Even a big bear is afraid to leave its cage. The animal from this video felt danger all the way through, and it could not behave so recklessly. It required at least a little time, and people were ready to provide it. In the long run, this grizzly found freedom and a new house. I think the animal was overwhelmingly thankful to people for this. This bear seems to not understand what happened to it. Bad people brought a polar bear away from its natural habitat, hoping to live on it. But at the 11th hour, shortly before the transaction, their plans were disturbed by freedom fighters. People did not only prevent this, but they also arrested the offenders. It was finally decided to bring the bear back to its native medium. Interestingly, it was transported by the business class. For this, the green lobbyists sent the pin-toed animals to sleep, and they placed it in a tight net that was tied to the helicopter. The bear found itself at home quickly. Judging by this reaction, it possibly didn't understand what had happened. The main thing is that the big predator became free again. The animal is likely to lay a little bit more. It'll come to itself and it'll go hunting that will be successful. They say that these animals are insatiable. They can swallow up to 90 pounds of food at a time. Talking about residents of cold regions, let's take a look at the manual. This is a very beautiful, nice, and unusual cat that you cannot tame. After noticing that the wild, fluffy animal needed help, people took it along and rendered necessary help to it. Unfortunately, this process was not so quick. The animal spent more than a month in captivity. On the bright side, when all injuries were healed, the manual accumulated strength in its veins up to the limit, and it was finally returned to its native habitat. These cats are considered to inhabit vast but fragmented territory of Asia. Their overall number exceeds 50,000 specimens. Basically, manuals prefer unwooded, arid areas with the heavy continental climate, mountains, steppes, and semi-deserts. For this cat, it's also important to have little snow. But as you've already understood from the clip, there are exceptions from the rules. Why did I say that it's not possible to tame the cat? This is because, at least, any host will get tired from removing its fur at home. Come on, this is a joke, of course, but the cat has proper fur. They say that its coat is the fluffiest and the densest among all cats in principle. Apart from that, we can tell manuals from other cats by its rather short but powerful paws sticking out of their bulky body. These cats are far from sprinters, however they have more than enough power and agility to make an accurate jerk. As you understand, the manual hunts mostly from ambush. Coloration and maximum silence allow our guests to blend in with the environment and catch up with its opponents when they don't expect this. After a dexterous jump, the enemy will experience a row of furious blows, bites, and pushes that will be impossible to survive. It's lucky that manuals prefer solitude. If they attacked in groups, like those lions in their pride, there would be absolutely terrible things happening in the world. Staying with cats, I suggest that you look at how the rare Siberian tiger reacted to a new house. These predators are considered masters of huge territories. As a rule, up to 500 square kilometers of land can accrue for a single specimen. This territory belongs to only one Siberian tiger. This is where it hunts, builds its house, sets its own rules. Do you imagine how hard and uncomfortable it is for these animals to live in captivity? The way this cat was circling around its cage and how it waited for the moment until it would be free speaks for itself. Naturally, people didn't have any moral right to stay away and not return the Siberian tiger to its native habitat. So at the first opportunity, it was exactly what they did. The orphaned predator didn't have to wait long. As soon as the door was opened, it came out of the cage and rushed in an unknown direction. These creatures are considerably less dexterous in such situations. They're used to exploring everything around them before taking actions. But this Siberian tiger possibly was in captivity for too long to act quietly and steadily. You can understand it, of course. Here's what I fail to understand. This is what takes place in the following clip. You can see a man that released 285 snakes at once. What's more, he didn't cry, he didn't cause panic, and he didn't even use any protective equipment. The man took out the snakes out of a big sack and started to disperse them barehanded. For me, for you, and for many other people, this will look wild and unusual. However, it's all quite normal for the Indians. The thing is that they consider a snake as the embodiment of the ancestor's soul and as a housekeeper. This is exactly why a man in the video is so careful of crawlers and he's not even afraid of them. While some creatures creep on the ground, others need trees as high as possible. Of course, I'm talking about monkeys. In our next story, those are surprising Attilidae that were deprived of their native house because of the fire. They were about to die. Fortunately, they were rescued, each and every. They were taken to the clinic, they were supported, they had their wounds cured, and at the same time they did it in a way so that they would not lose contact with their brethren. As soon as the treatment came to an end, the monkeys came back home. All of them left their cages, nearly at the first second. All of them with the exception of one monkey. This small monkey was afraid to leave the cage. It thought that it wouldn't survive and that it would be better and safer with people. However, everyone around understood that it's not the case. They managed to overcome the protective reaction of the primate by opening the cage. As soon as the poor monkey looked around, it understood how wonderful the world was that was ahead. It couldn't resist temptation and went to its brethren. Besides the point, what do you know about Attilidae? By the way, they're not the same as the majority. Their tail, for example, became a full-fledged hand for them over the course of evolution. With its help, they could cling to trees better and hold on where you may think it was impossible to keep balance. If I tell you in confidence, it's not only about the fact that they can wield their tail, they just have some bare sections covering the skin crests. It's exactly due to this why Attilidae are capable of increased coupling with branches. Let their tail alone, the very appearance of these primates is unique. They're considered the biggest on the American continent. Adult specimens weigh from 8.5 to 22 pounds, with the length of the body equal to 2.1 feet. An animal from the next story found itself in an especially difficult situation at a definite moment in its life. It was about to die. No one knows how this would have ended if it hadn't been for kind people that took along the koala called Bowie. In captivity, it went through necessary treatment to recover. The animal learned how to walk, climb trees, and orient itself in space. As soon as the koala's state improved, it was brought to its native forest and released into a tree. The animal was glad to rise higher. It stopped at a definite moment and looked at the people's faces that supported it. I'm sure that even despite the fact that the koala didn't say anything, it let them understand that it was thankful to them for everything. It seems to me that at such moments, people around experienced indescribable feelings. They were proud of themselves and their colleagues. Can people see furry mammoths again? What unusual creature's been hibernating for decades? What stands behind the recovery plan of the Tasmanian wolf? Later on, I'll show you animals that are about to be resuscitated or that could have already been resuscitated. Revive the mammoths. This is the task facing scientists from different places of our planet. Of course, we would like this process to be much faster, but the process of restoring extinct species is not as simple as it may seem at first glance. Geneticists from an American company expect that they'll be able to revive woolly mammoths extinct about 4,000 years ago by 2025. They plan to do this with the help of genome editing technology, which will add the genes of extinct animals to the genes of Asian elephants existing today. This idea seemed so promising to people that donors helped the company raise over $15 million. And here it's important to realize that the mammoths, born in such a non-standard way, will not be original but hybrid. However, because the DNA of Asian elephants and mammoths is 99.6% identical, scientists plan to take the very missing 0.4% of genes from mammoths, thus obtaining a complete genetic copy of woolly mammoths. It's still an open question what animal and how will it carry the embryos. Some think that Asian elephants are suitable for this role. Others think that it's better to use an artificial uterus. And strangely enough, the second option is not only easier to realize but also faster. All the necessary DNA data can be taken from the previously found bones of extinct animals, but strange as it may seem, in the process of implementation, the main problem arose not because of it. The second part of scientists confidently states that the reviving of mammoths will bring more minuses than pluses. These people are sure that the harm from trampling on moss and destruction of trees by mammoths will be more significant than the possible benefits. Besides, the woolly mammoth is able to mature no earlier than in 30 years, which once again calls into question the adequacy or expediency of this project. What do you think? Is it worth resurrecting already extinct animals? Or if fate treated them like this, then their time's past and it's not worth dredging up the past? Share your thoughts in the comments. Water bears. Despite the popular belief that it's not worth bringing anyone back to life, some scientists and laboratories do it. For example, Japanese researchers have successfully brought back to life an animal that had been frozen for 30 years. I'm talking about a tardigrade, found 3 decades ago in Antarctica. Tardigrades are also known as water bears. They're very small creatures, which length is barely more than a millimeter, if not less. But despite this, the creature rightfully holds the title of one of the most resilient on the entire planet. Tardigrades don't care at all about things that would kill ordinary organisms in a matter of minutes. They can easily survive nuclear explosions and even vacuum conditions in space. During the experiment, tardigrades withstood staying in liquid oxygen with a temperature of -315.4 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 months, 8-hour cooling with liquid helium with a temperature of -455.8 degrees Fahrenheit, as well as successfully withstood heating up to 212 degrees Fahrenheit. Besides, they were exposed to X-rays of 600,000 rads, and about 50% of the tardigrades survived. For comparison, a person can die when exposed to 5,000 rads. After all this, I don't know if scientists brought anyone back to life at all. After all, as soon as the water bear came to its senses after a long freeze, very soon it laid eggs and gave birth to completely healthy offspring. Who knows, maybe even 50 or 100 years of cryptobiosis would not have changed anything for these creatures. Move, tardigrades. The rotifer will say confidently that it will have every right to do so. Russian scientists have revived this creature after them being 24,000 years in hibernation. How can these primitive creatures do such a thing? Where do they get the strength and energy to live? None of the researchers has received an exact answer to this question yet. It's only known that when rotifers enter their state of zen, they curl up in a ball and slow down most of the life processes, waiting for better times. Previously, scientists believed that such hibernation allows them to survive for as long as 10 years, and it seemed to be an impressive result. But recently, 24,000-year-old rotifers were found in samples of permafrost in Yakutia, Russia, which still felt great. It's scary to even think about what they're capable of in theory. These organisms are also known as wheel animals. They got their name from the cilia formed on their front part. They use them to move around and feed. It'd be strange if, with such a survival date, they lived in a specific area, so they can be found not only in fresh water, but also in moist soil and damp moss. In total, science knows more than 1,500 species of rotifers, but so far none of the scientists have solved any of their secrets. The people just say the obvious things, that the animals slow down the vital processes in their body very abruptly and stuff. But no one knows exactly how this happens. But people keep finding new worms that surprise no less than the previous ones. So this time they got a Siberian worm, which stayed in hibernation more than previous creatures, about 46,000 years. Again, no one understands how a creature can be in cryptobiosis for so long. If you didn't know, cryptobiosis is an analog of anabiosis or suspended animation. The tissues of a living creature in this state are dried out, due to which they're not exposed and death does not occur. This is an incredibly useful quality for a worm living in the Siberian permafrost. Science knows very few creatures capable of going into cryptobiosis, and almost nothing is known about the concept of this phenomenon. We often talk about reviving a species, but in any case it implies the restoration of a still living being in a frozen state or something like that. But do you know what the first creature in history to be truly revived was? It was a bucardo, a subspecies of the Iberian ibex. This animal, which lived in the Pyrenees in Spain and France, was exterminated by hunters at the end of the 20th century. In 1989, scientists said there were about 10 bucardo in the world, and in 2000, the last representative of the species, the female Celia, died. Some scientists have already given up in despair, but they did it only because of ignorance. It turned out that when the female was still alive, some resourceful people took her genetic material and froze skin samples. Thanks to this, there was a slim chance that the species could still be restored. They did it in the following way. The bucardo DNA was placed in the eggs of goats, from which the goat material was removed, and then the embryos were planted in surrogate mother goats. In short, they tried to revive bucardo by cloning goats. Spanish institutes were engaged in this, and soon they received the first positive news. The next goat that was born this way turned out to be a female. Unfortunately, she lived less than 10 minutes. She had serious inoperable lung pathology. However, this already indicated that it would be possible to restore the species in this way sooner or later. Black-footed ferret. Actually, I see that cloning is a fairly good process among scientists, which has a good percentage of successful mission completions. Here's another example. In the United States, for the first time, people successfully cloned an endangered species of ferrets called the black-footed ferret. In order to succeed, the people used frozen cells from an extinct species. They were able to modify them and get a completely healthy, new individual which had no problems and was able to perform any important functions for reproduction. It's great that modern cloning and genome editing technologies can save other animals that are on the verge of extinction. For example, the Przewalski's horse, also known as the Mongolian wild horse. This species used to live in Asia, but by 1969 there were no more of them left in the wild. Fortunately, some representatives of the species survived in captivity, so it was decided to immediately begin the process of cloning. In the summer of 2020, the first results appeared, and a healthy foal was born. It was cloned from genetic material preserved 40 years ago. Once the foal is weaned, it will join other members of its species in the safari park and begin to develop like the rest of the individuals. People do not want to take special care of it, as there's a high risk that it will not grow strong and independent enough, which after a while will lead to the same outcome as before, that is, extinction. One might think that there are enough horses in the world, so why clone all of them, even the most ancient individuals? I personally have not found an answer to this question. Probably they have some special effect on the flora and fauna in the wild. But be that as it may, we should not be concerned about it. We only see that in recent years, people are working harder and harder to clone the Siberian horse, an ancient and rare breed. The genome, which will serve as a sample for further research, was taken by scientists from the remains found in Yakutia, Russia. According to preliminary estimates, the remains were about 42,000 years old. From them, people successfully extracted a sample of liquid blood, preserved due to low temperature. It's likely that since a huge amount of money and so much time is spent on this, the species will indeed bring biological diversity to nature and help in cloning other, no less rare creatures. The researchers are confident that it'll be possible to restore the Siberian horse, although it will take a couple or 3 years. Tasmanian wolf. Have you ever heard of the Tasmanian wolf? If you haven't, it's quite strange because this animal can safely be called a legendary animal, as many people, even those not connected with biological sciences, know about it. There are several reasons for this. Firstly, the Tasmanian wolf became extinct not so long ago. Secondly, it's beautiful and striped. Thirdly, it does not want to be considered completely extinct, which people are happy to help it with. The Tasmanian wolf, also known as the thylacine, was a rather large predator, which could weigh up to 66 pounds and be about 5 feet long. Its coat was short and thick with a remarkable color. On a light brown background, there were 13 to 19 transverse dark stripes that were located behind the shoulder blades. For this peculiarity, it's also called Tasmanian tiger. How can one accept the extinction of this beautiful creature? Its powerful jaws alone made its enemies tremble with terror because the animal opened its amazing mouth 80 degrees. Yes, there's an opinion that the Tasmanian wolf is still alive. Allegedly, it's hiding somewhere in the far reaches of Australia. And because of the inaccessibility of those regions, it doesn't show its face to people. But this is probably urban legend. After all, such wolves used to be found in many places where now there's no news of them. That's why Australian scientists have seriously decided to revive it. They received a generous compensation from the state in the amount of $5 million and created an improved laboratory, which has everything necessary for the successful completion of the mission. However, before completing it, it's necessary to at least bring it to half. Scientists have chosen the method of reverse extinction of the de-extinction. For this purpose, in the next 10 years, they plan to use genome editing technologies and, using preserved DNA samples, transform the cells of the Dunnart into the cells of the Tasmanian wolf. Ironically, it's this small animal that turned out to be the closest living relative of the predator. Then these cells should be used to create an embryo of a Tasmanian wolf and place it in the body of a female of some large marsupial animal, for example, a quoll. After that, all that remains is to take the baby out of the pouch and make sure it grows up safe and healthy. That's about it. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel.